started. So I'm going to try and leave 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A. What typically happens with my presentations is that I want to give you more details and extra stuff, so there's usually a little less time for questions. But I will make a solid attempt to not, go off topic or anything, and we're just going to jump right in. These are the things that we're getting into. As Lori mentioned, this is part 2 of sort of a webinar series about Silver Efex Pro, where we're sort of doing a deeper dive into tips and techniques with Silver Efex Pro. And everything that we did in part 1 will kind of grow or we'll hit upon them, but these are different sorts of tools, and the discussion is slightly different than part 1. So I kind of expect that folks already have an understanding of the basic use of the interface, and we're going to go from there. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look at our first image, and we'll talk about the zone mapping system so you can kind of get to know how the system is working and why you might actually use it. Before we would go into Silver Efex Pro, or before I would anyways, of course everyone's workflow might be different, I tend to do a good amount of stuff or work to an image before bringing it into Silver Efex. I'm not going to dwell on those things during this presentation, but I think there are some contrast adjustments that I would make to this image before going into Silver Efex usually, and I didn't. All I've done is made sure that my white balance was close to how I want it to be, and I think I turned on the lens correction, which is actually automatic with Photolab. By the way, we're going to be launching from Photolab 4 today, as well as from Photoshop to take a look at some of the techniques that you can utilize from the Photoshop version of the software, using layers and layer masks, etc. But everything we talk about in Silver Efex is the same, whether you're using Photolab, Lightroom, Photoshop, whatever, as your raw processor, and is exactly the same in terms of the interface for Macintosh or Apple users and PC users, except for maybe some of the shortcuts, which I'll try to tell you what I'm doing. If I use any shortcuts at all, I'll definitely tell you what it is on a Mac, and I'll attempt to do it on a PC. All right, so we've got our first image. Here in Photolab, we're accessing the software by clicking on the Nick Collection button in the lower right corner of the interface. And actually, before I click on Silver Efex Pro within the plugin selector, I'm just going to make sure that my settings are all set properly, because I change these from time to time for different purposes. So I clicked on the settings button, and what's key in our case here for the webinar is, in what I'm going to suggest anyways, is when you're working from a raw file and you want to be able to transform your image as much as, maybe a little bit, maybe a lot when converting to black and white and making a very contrasty image out of a flat image like what we have here. I'm going to suggest that you use a TIFF workflow. So you're going to export as a TIFF as your initial adjustment, and 16-bit per channel. This is just going to yield a much higher quality file. Therefore, it is a much larger file in terms of your hard drive space, but it's going to yield a better quality result, especially if you ever want to print your photographs. It's a much better workflow for that purpose. For now, I'm actually going to take my resolution or the size of my pixel dimension here. I'm going to just drop it to 50% because this was a 45 megapixel file, and I'm going to make it 20 something, 27 or so. For our presentation, just to make things process a little bit faster, because the bigger the file, the longer we're going to have to wait as we click the OK button and so on. The rest of these adjustments I don't have to worry about. So I'm not going to have to worry about the watermark, and my ICC profile I'll actually just leave as shot. You obviously can change that if you need to, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So we'll just click the OK button for now. Click into Silver Efex Pro 2. And we're going to start by making a couple of adjustments to the image, and then I want to show you what's called the zone mapping system, which it sort of came based upon Ansel Adams and the F64 groups. Sorry, I thought that was going to open in front. F64 groups zone system for shooting and processing black and white film. long story short, I'll tell you what this is in just a second as well. The zone mapping system allows us to understand the tonal value on a scale from 0 to 10. It'll make more sense when I show you. So this little box here just allows us to work in a non-destructive workflow when launching from Photolab or Lightroom. And basically what this is telling us is because we're dealing with a TIFF file, as long as the checkbox that's in the lower right quadrant of our interface is checked on, we can re-edit the image after we're done. We can sort of come back a month later or a week later or a day or an hour after we've clicked the save button, and we can reprocess the image within Silver Efex Pro. It's a pretty nice feature. I click the OK button. I'm going to hide the presets on the left side for just a little bit to give our image a little bit more real estate. And then let's actually just take the dynamic brightness slider down and add a little contrast. So we're in the global adjustments section here, and I'm just adding a little bit of contrast and darkening the image down. And then follow me into the lower right corner so we can get into the zone mapping system. The first thing that I want to get into is that it breaks our tonal values up into technically 11 different, if you will, zones. And what this does is it's an indicator system that lets us know where the different brightness values are in our image. The way to decode this is that zone 10, the one on the far right, anything that has let me add more contrast so this is more noticeable. This is going to be, we're not going to leave the contrast on here, but it'll be easy to see. So as I scroll over zone 10 here, you'll notice these lines that show up on anything that falls within zone 10. What that means is that is highlights with no detail. That's the zone 10 is indicating that those areas that have those indicator lines are blown out. So like the top of all of these stairs here, blown out with no detail because of the contrast that we added. If I then take my cursor and sort of step down into the chart here, you can go down into zone 1 or zone 0, and now it's easier to see these in zone 0. I'm actually going to click on zone 0, and what you're seeing here is black with no detail, right? And so where this becomes or starts to become important, there's numerous ways of using this tool, but where it comes in to my own workflow is when I'm printing, and it makes sure that when I make a print of these images that I'm not blowing out information that I don't want to in print, and I'm not blocking up information that I don't want to block up, right? And what we can do, if you're interested in sort of locking the zone mapping system on, is just click on the zone that you want indicated, right? So if I click on zone 0 and I click on zone 10, both of those are locked on. And now if I start to reduce the contrast slider, you'll actually notice those things change, right? So as I bring the contrast slider down, here, there it is, at 83%, I still have in the, let's say, upper left corner of the image, some places that are zone 0, that is sections of the image where there's no detail at all. And then zone 10 is the top of these stairs and these very blown out areas. As I start bringing that contrast down, I can see that I'm recovering that detail again. It was already in the image. I'm just making sure that I get it back by making sure that that zone system is on. Let's actually push the image to the limit here with contrast. So at 45, if I zoom in here, I'm gonna hit Command plus a couple times, use my navigator to move around. So at 45% contrast with this particular image, I have some areas that are now in zone 10. So I know if I print this, those areas aren't going to lay down any ink, right? Or if I'm looking at it on screen, it's going to be white with no detail. If I go over to the zone mapping system and I turn this off, you can kind of see that, right? It's just those certain areas with the very brightest values in there as I turn that on and off. So that's one way of using the zone mapping system, is as an indicator for, you know, blown out highlights or blocked up shadows. Another way to use it is to kind of just understand where the brightness levels are of your image. So zone 5, you can see it shows up with the red lines because each one of those different zones has a different color to it. or slightly different color, depending upon going from zone 4 to zone 5 and so on. So zone 5 is red, and zone 5 is middle gray. So these are the tones that are right smack in the middle between black and white, right? So that's zone 5. And you might decide that you want a low-key image, a photograph that is more is darker than it is lighter. So you can use these zone mapping systems to kind of make sure that maybe you don't have anything that's in zone 9 or zone 8 if you wanted to create a low-key or a darker image. So I've turned on zone 8 and I've turned on zone 9. Let's say we move into our brightness. So follow me into the upper right corner. I'm going to open up my brightness. I'm going to hit Command 0 on my keyboard. So that would be Control 0 on a PC, Command 0 on a Mac. That brings us to a full screen view of the image so that it kind of fits to screen for us so we can see the whole thing. All right, so in the global adjustments here, if I take my dynamic brightness and I start darkening that down even more, I can see my zones change. And then if I take, let's say, like my brightness slider and I start darkening that, I can get a feel for exactly where the tones are within zone 8 and 9, because those are the zones that are on. And as I bring the brightness slider down, you'll notice they all disappear, right? So here I've got an image with no zone 8 or zone 9. In my opinion, it's a little bit too dark overall, so we could actually just take the shadow slider up and then maybe even the midtones a little bit. And now we have a much darker representation of the same image. You can see that obviously, but we can also guarantee that nothing is within zone 8 or 9. And so when we print the image, the brightest value is going to be within zone 7, which in this case might be a nice place to put it for this particular image. Now, we really haven't done anything to the photograph except for some of these global adjustments. This is an image that probably could use some dodging and burning selectively with control points, but I don't want to do too much on this image because I want to move forward. We're already 15 minutes into the presentation. We've only looked at one photo. So I say we just save what we've done to this image as a preset, and let's see if it works on a different image as we move to the next one. So follow me to the upper left corner. Let's save this as a preset, and to do that, you'd open up your preset library. You move into the custom section here, which mine is sort of has been shrunk down into the lower left corner or minimized. If I click on the custom section, it's going to pop up, and now I have access to all of my custom recipes that I've created for my own workflows. If I want to create a new custom recipe from the adjustments that we've made so far on this image, you just click the plus button that's to the right of the custom label there. So click on that, and I'm going to call this Stepwell preset. I'm going to click OK, and that shows up on the left side in the custom section of our Silver Efex interface. Let's say we're done and we like what we've done. We can click the Save button in the lower right corner of the interface, and that's going to save the image back out. And now we're going to have a TIFF file in our PhotoLab interface right next to our original RAW file and saved into the same folder as the original RAW file. So here's our black and white, and here is our original image. Let's launch this picture, and we're gonna try and use that same preset, but we might need to make some adjustments and then maybe update the preset. And I also want to talk to you about the use of control points as we sort of move in and start using slightly more advanced or get a better understanding of how they're working. So let's click on Nik Collection, go into Silver Efex Pro. The settings have already been set. I made sure that they were good to go on the previous image. So those are sticky. They're going to be the same for this image. So we're taking this file that what was 45 megapixels. I shrunk it down to 27 megapixels, I think. No, I shrunk it down to 11 megapixels in this case. Again, I'm doing that for the sake of our processing, because if I left this at 45 with the webinar going and all of this stuff, it will slow down my computer system. I'm on a 2018 MacBook Pro. I want to say I've got 16 gigs of RAM or something. So it's not a bad computer, but it's also not the fastest computer in the whole world. So you can kind of get a sense of how it might respond on your computer if you don't already use the software. Okay, so your presets. These are the custom presets that I have within my interface. They're the ones that I've created for different purposes and images. And the stepwell preset is the one that we just created. Let's click on it and let's get a sense of if it even works on this photograph. And it kind of does. I like what's happening in the foreground, but most of the image has just been completely blacked out because of the brightness adjustments. We can see that visually if we wanted to. We could even go in and use the zone mapping system and get a sense of what's happening. And the reason this has happened, ladies and gentlemen, is not because that was a bad preset, but it's because I used an image that was relatively flat, right? There wasn't a really bright highlight, there wasn't a really dark shadow in that last image. So I was able to kind of push the brightness and the contrasts because the last image was predominantly bright, and we darkened it way down. This preset isn't perfect for this image because it was designed for a different kind of photograph, but I like the overall sort of lower key feel to the image. So let's see if we can get a low key style and then update our stepwell preset. So yeah, let's start with the brightness. I'm just going to bring that back up. And what I've done, just so you know, in case you missed anything, I turned on zone 1, which is the very dark shadows. Zone 0 would be black with no detail. Zone 1 would be shadow with detail, and then moving into zone 2. So I actually probably want to get that subject, the gentleman who's sweeping, probably to around zone 3 or zone 4. So I'll just keep zone 3 and zone 4 on, and then I'll just basically double click on the image. I think I missed my mark. Or maybe we need to keep brightening it. There we go. So I need to brighten to 15% before he starts to show up within zone 3 and zone 4. Let's turn this off. I think my adjustment is a little bit too bright overall, but one way that we can change this is to stop using these global adjustments and maybe use some other adjustments like the color filter. In fact, check this one out. Let's move to the history state browser. So if you follow my cursor to the lower left corner here, the history state browser records everything that we do within Silver Efex while we're here. If I click on the compare button, we can see the original black and white conversion to where we are now. So I like where we are. I don't think we're done yet, but if you ever want to see what the image looked like originally in color, what you can do after you've pressed the compare button at least once is this little indicator on the left side shows up. The indicator on the left side here within the history state browser tells you what you're looking at when you press the compare button. So anything that's highlighted is what you're seeing normally, right? So I'm not pressing the compare button, I'm just seeing this state and everything that happened before it. This here I can click on and drag to different states. So in this case, if I wanted to see the original image in color, I can just click on the state browser and then drag it up to original image, and then click the compare button, and I can see what the photograph looked like originally in color, which is really quite handy. Because what Silver Efex Pro is doing is it's utilizing all of the color information that was in the image that we brought into Silver Efex. So it's not just desaturating the photograph, it's literally looking at the image and allowing us to manipulate the photograph based upon those original colors. So remembering that, you know, these flowers here are this really beautiful sort of pink magenta-y color. The foliage in the corners are a nice dark green. And then some of these other bits of foliage are sort of more yellow-green, right? And understanding where that's coming from, or kind of recalling how that's going to convert to black and white is a nice thing to do, and being able to see it is even better in my opinion. But you want to know that because when you start using the color filter tool and or the film types, the original color information is how the software makes its transformation. So if we click into the color filter and I go and click on the red color filter, now you can see those magenta-y pink flowers, they pop out a whole lot more. Whereas if I go to the blue color filter, now the image looks very, very different, right? And by the way, what this is doing is the software is attempting to emulate what the image would look like had it been shot on black and white film with one of these particular color filters, an actual piece of glass in front of the lens. Basically, the color filters would change the light that gets transmitted through the lens, and therefore you get a different effect on your black and white film. So if you go from, let's say, neutral, the gray one, to the blue color filter, you're going to see a dramatic change. What's really wonderful, and kind of the next step to that, is the fact that you can create any color filter you want. So it has sort of 5 of the more common traditional glass color filters that it can emulate, but you can also control the strength. And watch this as I bring this up to, way too much, to 157% or so. I'm able to click on my hue slider, and this is as if I've created like a magenta color filter, right? Or if I click on it and I start dragging it over towards cyan or dragging it over towards green, you can do some really interesting stuff. And in fact, one of the more advanced techniques that we'll talk about at the very end utilizes these different color filters on different layers in Photoshop, which allows you to create an image that couldn't have been created in the first place with a single photograph, with, let's say, like black and white film anyways. All right, so I like what's happening with this yellow color filter. Let's bring this strength down. The problem is I'm going to update my my preset as we talked about, and one thing that I tend to avoid in developing presets is the color filter, because the color filter is so transformative on every individual picture, because it's based upon the color that exists in the scene. So I usually stay away from color filters unless I'm explicitly making a color filter preset. So that's just a sort of little tip as well. All right, so let's say we really like what's going on here. I actually do need to bring this back down, darken that down. And to kind of balance out the image, I love what was happening when we had a lower key foreground here. So let's close up our basic adjustments and jump into our selective adjustments. We haven't talked about control points yet. These are probably the most important tool in the software. And what the control points allow you to do is target sections or objects in an image, and then control the brightness and contrast of them here in Silver Efex. So if I wanted to draw more attention to our subject, I might take a control point, which, by the way, what I did was just clicked on the control point box on the right side. My cursor is now turned into a little crosshair, and I can just click and drop my control point. What this control point is going to do is it's going to look for the object that we placed the point on. So we placed it on the foreground in this case, and it allows us to make adjustments to the brightness, contrast, structure. We can amplify the whites, amplify the blacks. We have a fine structure slider, and then we have a selective colorization as well. So if we wanted to reintroduce the color into our black and white image, that's a way to do it with that last slider there. If you're following along and you're saying, oh, I only have brightness, contrast, and structure, what is happening is by default, your control point is going to look like this. You will have a slider that's parallel with the point itself, and that is the size of the area that the control point will be affecting. I'll talk about that in a second. And then you have brightness, contrast, and structure. If you want to control that subset of tools, the extra tools that each control point has, you have to click on the little triangle that's below the structure slider, and then it will expand out so that you've got amplify whites, amplify blacks, fine structure, and so on. All right, so let's go ahead and darken down that foreground. Let's add a little bit of contrast. And one of the things that you're going to notice about these control points is that the resulting adjustment that you get looks very photographic. The selections that it makes is beautiful. It doesn't necessarily cut things out, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but it doesn't necessarily cut things out. But what it does is it allows us to control these facets, brightness, contrast, structure, and so on, in a way that is natural looking for the most part. There's definitely ways of making adjustments that are not natural, but without us having to make complex, complicated selections. You literally drop the point on an object, and then you can control the brightness or the contrast or whatever aspect you need to. So if I go and place this control point on our flowers here, let's zoom in a little bit. I'll also minimize the history browser here. Okay, so I've zoomed in and I've got a control point on the flowers. And what we can do is, let's say I take my brightness, I can brighten this up. And what you'll notice is that it doesn't affect basically anything else outside of those flowers, right? There's a slight adjustment in tone as I'm adjusting it, but it's very slight. And in fact, let's brighten up those flowers completely. They're blown out at this point. Oops, sorry, I had to put it there. But watch what happens here. So I place my point, I can expand my area of influence so that my control point is going to affect all of those flowers. And as I do that, as I expand this out, you'll notice that some of the background is being affected. As I grow that area of influence, you can kind of see it snap a little bit. It'll brighten up as I make this bigger. What the control point's doing is it thinks it should be adjusting some of these tones back here so that the adjustment looks kind of realistic to what would happen in a dark room when you're dodging and burning, for the most part anyways. So this is going to allow you to control those brightness levels. And then if you need to hone in your selection, like let's say you don't want this control point to affect over here, you use what's called a constricting control point, right? And so this control point is the one we're making our adjustment with, and we've dramatically brightened up those flowers. The next control point, so I'll go back over to the right side and click on the Add Control Point button, or the control point button itself. And I'll just place the point in this tree that is kind of having a little bit of the adjustment of this first control point. And watch what happens as I just click and drop the point. See how it darkens back down? And that's because what's happening is as we add control points, each control point gets smarter. So this control point, this sort of constricting control point, knows that it should be making a selection of the thing that we placed it on, so the tree in the background. And then this control point kind of better understands what it should be affecting because now we have an extra control point and they all communicate with each other. So watch this. If I click on this point and I drag it away and then follow my cursor, we're going to move into the control points list here. We're going to take control point number 2, so in the control points list, and we're going to turn on the selection just to get a sense of what it's affecting. So as I click on that right side checkbox over there, we're getting an indicator that's telling us what this point is adjusting. And what you're seeing is anything that is white, this control point is affecting almost completely. In terms of the adjustment that we've made will be applied to any of those things that are showing up white. Anything that is really dark or black has none or very little of the effect. So if it's totally black, that control point isn't adjusting it at all. And you can see in these areas, the control point is affecting into those trees. It also found these flowers over here, which is pretty miraculous, pretty amazing, because all we did was place the point and we sized our area of influence. That's the circle that's going around the control point itself. The bigger the area of influence, sort of the larger the tolerance there will be. And so it is finding all of those little objects that it thinks it should be selecting based upon what we've placed the point on. If you click that control point, you start dragging it around, you can actually instantly see the selection change. And that's going to be important as well. And I'll show you this on a different image. Where you place the control point becomes important. But it's way easier to see that when you're not in this mask mode, because again, we're just looking at what the control point is selecting. Now watch this. If I go back over to our control point number 3 and I drag this in and I place it in this tree, well, now these two control points are better communicating, and that point understands that we don't want it to affect into these trees. In fact, if we take another control point and I place it back here in the background, there, it's sort of blacked out all of the rest of that stuff. So what this goes to show you is that basically the more control points you add, the smarter each control point gets. The problem is you don't want these control points to be, like perfect all of the time, because then the adjustment that you make will be more noticeable and less natural looking, or can be anyways. So let's turn off the selection. So now we're just back into our image. And instead of just using these control points as constrictive points, let's actually use them with their adjustments. Let's darken down that background a little bit. And so now the flowers are sort of popping out that much more. Again, they're still too bright, but it goes to show you kind of what's being adjusted based upon these different points. When we go back to our control point with our flowers, let's go ahead and bring that back down a little bit so we can get some more detail. And then I'll add some contrast and a little bit of structure. This image is particularly busy, but those flowers do a nice job to kind of show you what the selections can look like. All right, so we've talked about sort of the technical aspects of the control points, how they're making their selections. Basically, you place the point on the object. The control point looks for that object inside of the circle, and then makes as clean a selection as it can based upon where you've placed it, what tone you've placed it on, and the communication with the rest of the control points. Let's talk a little bit more about technique with these control points, right? So this control point number 1, is darkening down our foreground a good amount. And I want that same effect happening over here and happening over here. There's 2 ways or several ways that you could do this. You could just take your area of influence and expand it out, right? But that's like taking a really big broad brush and, you know, sort of painting over the whole thing. To be a little bit more precise, what we'll do is we'll make that control point a little bit smaller, and then I'll duplicate it so that it kind of fits within this section in the foreground, so that we get a basically identical set of adjustments with 3 or 4 control points that are all identical. And to do that, there's actually several ways to duplicate a control point. The way that I typically run with is holding the Option key down on my Mac, be Alt if you're on a PC. While you hold that down, you click on the control point and drag away. So Option, click and drag, right? And so this becomes very quick and easy, and then I can just place the points exactly where I want them to be. And I can see them change my area as we move them around, right? So I might even take one, let's place it in here. I might take one and even put it right up in here, just to add some contrast and darken those tones down. Well, now our subject is much too dark. He kind of has been sort of burned out or darkened down because of the overall adjustments that we had. So let's take a new control point and dodge him a little bit. You can click the control point button on the right side, or if you hit Shift Command A on a Mac, that would be Shift Control A on a PC. It gives you these crosshairs for creating a new control point. So rather than having to go over to the right side of the interface every time I want a new control point, I just tap Shift Command A, and it gives me the crosshair so that I can create my new control point. And then I can go in and dodge him, place the point on his clothing as well. And I want to be able to control all 3 of these control points at once, because right now they're just constricting, right? They're not actually doing making any adjustments. What they're doing is they're just making sure that these other control points aren't affecting those objects. But if I want to control all 3 of them at once, I can group them. To group control points, you have to activate all of the ones that you want to group, all the control points you want to group. There are 2 ways to do that. You can hold the Shift key down on your keyboard and click on each control point that you want to activate. And then click the group button, which is over here on the right side of the interface underneath the control points list. You can just click on that. Or the other way to highlight multiple control points in an image is to click and drag. So if I'm just on my image and I click somewhere that's not on a control point, so I just click and then I drag, it creates a bounding box. And all I've got to do is encompass any of the control points that I want to include in my group. So click and drag around those 3, and then just tap the group button on the right side of the interface, and it groups all 3 of those control points together. So now when I go and make adjustments to, let's say, structure or amplify blacks or whites or contrast and so on, it's affecting all 3 of those control points, right? So we can make these adjustments very quickly and easily without having to control each individual control point separately. So that's a lot probably to take in with control points if you're not familiar with them. There is a ton more information that you can find. I'm just going to jump over into my Chrome browser. If you go to the nickcollection.dxo.com, first of all, you can find all of the webinars, both the upcoming webinars as well as if you scroll down, a ton of recorded webinars that we've been doing for the past few years here. But if you want to learn more and you don't necessarily want to watch the videos all the time, you can go to the Explore section, and then if you click on Customer Support, and I'm not going to do it right now because I want to get back to the content, but if you click on Customer Support, you scroll down and there's a whole section on Silver Efex which explains all of these things as well, but in written form. So it's a different way to kind of study up on these things. All right, so let's say we are ecstatic with the adjustments that we've made here. I want to update my preset that we made on the previous image. I actually probably should have just done that earlier. But if we want to update a preset, what you do is you just go back over into your custom preset section. So we'll go into those presets. In this case, I've so dramatically adjusted the preset, I'd probably just make a new one. But just to show you how these tools work, if I wanted to update our stepwell preset so that we have the adjustments on the image that we've got here, sans control points, so I'm not going to save the control points in this case. What you do is you move over to the left side in the custom section here, and you click the button that's in the lower right corner of the preset image that you want to update. So we're in the stepwell preset. I want to update it, so I click this button. It's going to say, are you sure? I'm going to say yes, and now I've updated my stepwell preset. Now, let's say I wanted to back these things up, or I wanted to share them with friends, or I've got a website where I, share. I don't, by the way, but let's say, for example, you wanted to share your presets on your own website. It's easy to export these, and other people can download them and install them into their Silver Efex. So what you do if you want to export your presets from Silver Efex is you just click the little arrow that's in the upper right corner of any of the presets that you wish to export. So let's try that. We're going to click export. It's going to ask you where you want to save. I'm going to go ahead and just save mine right to the desktop. It's already named stepwell preset. The .np file is the file format for the Silver Efex Pro presets. And all you've got to do is click the save button. And now that preset has been saved to my desktop. And again, the use case for that is if you want to back them up. Like let's say you create your own custom presets and you use them for all of your images and all of your work all the time. You don't want to lose them if you have a problem with a hard drive or your computer, so you can back them up just like you'd back up your photographs somewhere on the cloud or on the cloud and on different formats of saving your images and so on. Anyways, that's how you export your preset. Let's click save. We got a lot more to talk about here. We've already talked about creating presets in the zone mapping system. We've talked about updating their presets. So here we're back in the Photolab software, Photolab 4 to be specific. We've got our original image and then our enhanced image. And I'm running low on time, so I'm going to minimize DxO. Let's jump over into Photoshop, and let's talk about some of these other things. So I want to talk to you about the brush tool, and I want to talk to you about converting. Yeah, I'm going to show you an advanced workflow. Let's start with this image of Ellie. So we'll go into Silver Efex Pro. I want to show you the brush tool here. There's a brush capability in the Photoshop versions of the Nick plugins, which allows you to brush the effect in or remove the black and white conversion from areas in your image. You can use control points, you can use presets or whatever that you see fit for the image. Let's say we start with this preset, Painted Lady preset. And let's say I go in and I start to use some control points. Let's dot or burn the sky down a little bit to get a little bit more detail. And let's say we love this, but we actually wanted Ellie to be in color. Well, there's two different ways to do that. You could do it actually right in the software, where you take control points and you just reintroduce the color using the selective colorization slider. right? So we can go and duplicate this point, and we can have a black and white background with our toddler in color, right? You do have to be careful because this control point is now selecting her sort of aqua, or I guess seafoam, sort of the green blue shirt, and the control point is starting to reintroduce some of the color into the background. So we put a constrictive point in, it'll clean it up for us, right? So this is one way of maybe reintroducing color back into a black and white image, right? Cool. Let me show you the other way to do it, and that's with the brush tool. So I'm going to delete, oh, I don't want to delete all of those control points. I just want to delete these control points. So let's use the brush tool. Rather than clicking the save button or / the OK button like we've done with the other images so far within Silver Efex, we're going to click the brush button. When you click the brush button, it brings you back over into Photoshop, and it allows you to use the Nik Selective tool, which is now transformed into this brush tool. Sorry, let me close that. There we go. And the Nik Selective tool, which is transformed into the brush tool, allows you to paint the effect in. So I can go in with my brush tool. Let's actually create a larger brush for now. It's still too small. We can paint it in. We can erase it. So this is the paintbrush. Here's the eraser tool. You can fill the entire layer. So if you click the fill button, it fills the whole thing in. Or you can erase. So you can actually junk the whole layer if you wanted to paint the whole thing in. So these 4 buttons work like that. So it deletes the whole thing. So, sorry, doesn't delete. It hides the Silver Efex adjustment. This one allows you to fill the Silver Efex adjustment, and then you can erase or paint the effect using those 2 tools. So in this case, we want toddler here to be in color, but the background to be in black and white. So we can use the brush tool to do that. I'm using a trackpad right now, so I'm not being very precise. If I wanted to do this in in a real situation, we would be zooming in, ideally probably using a pen tablet, like a nice Wacom tablet or something like that. That's going to give us a lot more control over exactly where the brush is going in. But now we have a black and white image with our color toddler, which conceptually can be very interesting to do, right? And it creates an interesting effect. When you're all set and you're done, you just click the apply button. And that allows you to apply your adjustments with your brush tool applied to the photographs that you're using. And that's how you use the brush capability within the Photoshop version of the software. Now, I use a brush capability with the Nik plugins on 60%, 70% maybe at most, of the images that I process with Silver Efex. But I rarely ever use that brush button. I want to show you what I typically do. It is from the Photoshop version of the software, but I don't press the brush button like that. So what I'll do is I'll go into Silver Efex Pro. Give it a second here. I'll make whatever adjustments. And in fact, this workflow can get not necessarily really complex, but can use some pre-visualization, meaning I want to sort of think about what I want my resulting image to look like when I'm all done, because what I'll end up doing is using 2 layers of black and white conversion to create the exact image that I want. I think the most straightforward way of showing this, because I can spend 25 minutes on one layer, click the OK button, and then basically come back into Silver Efex afterwards with another layer of color and do it again, and then I mix those layers together. I'm going to show you that, but in a very abridged technique. So I'll go into my color filter in this case, and I'm just going to click on the blue color filter. Let's see what happens with all of them. All right, I love what's happening with the red color filter. I'm going to turn this up a little bit more, and let's actually move this towards yellow just a touch. And we're going to go into our global adjustments, and I'm just going to darken this down. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm kind of paying attention, or I'm attempting to pay attention to the darker leaves in the image. And then on the next layer, I'm going to really only pay attention to the flowers. And then what we're going to end up doing is brushing those 2 together. And they will be very different. Aesthetically, it'll look very different than if we were or if we just had one visit to Silver Efex. Okay, so let's go into contrast. I'm just kind of trying to make some adjustments here that will be very noticeable as we try this process. So again, all I'm doing is paying attention to the darker tone leaves, and then in the next layer, we're actually going to pay attention to the brighter tone leaves. But let's say we love what we've got. I'm going to click the OK button, and then I'm going to let that convert from color to black and white. It brings us back over into Photoshop, and in Photoshop, by default, you're going to have a separate layer. So what I did here is I just opened up my layers palette here in Photoshop for anyone not familiar. And we've got our original background layer, and we have our Silver Efex layer. Just going to shrink this a little bit. What we're going to do is turn off our Silver Efex Pro layer, right, which has been primarily adjusted paying attention to those darker leaves. So I'm going to turn that off. We're going to click on our background again, and I'm going to go back into Silver Efex, and we're going to convert the image from color to black and white again. The important part of this is that you turn off the black and white layer that you just made, because we want to reconvert the image from color to black and white for this kind of technique. This time I'm going to click on the yellow color filter. Well, let's see. Yeah, let's go with yellow. And then let's make I want to make the leaves, or not the leaves, I want to make the flowers nice and bright and have really nice contrast to them. So let's add some contrast. Let's add some structure. Add more highlight structure. So right now, this is sort of painful on my eyes. It's like too much overall. But when we start mixing the two layers together, because I'm really only paying attention to the flowers now, I think it's going to create a really interesting overall effect. So let's darken down the shadows, but we'll keep those highlights bright. Okay, so I like what's happening. I'm going to click the OK button. What we're going to get now is we'll have two layers of our black and white conversions. One where we paid attention to the flowers, and one where we paid attention to the leaves in the background. And you can see the background one, this background Silver Efex, is substantially darker than our top layer. The key, let me minimize the Nix selective tool. The key to this technique is to create a layer mask on Silver Efex. For anyone who's not familiar with Photoshop layer mask, that's your homework for today. Go look up layer masking. And you don't have to be, super proficient or an expert in it. All you have to do is look it up and understand what's happening. And basically what a layer mask is going to allow us to do is paint parts of this layer so that they're visible when we have this layer underneath it. So, so I've clicked on my Silver Efex layer, my brighter layer. I'm going to move down into our layers palette here, and there's a little rectangle with a circle in it. If I just press that button, it's going to give me a white layer mask. White layer mask reveals the whole thing. If I hold the Option key down on a Mac, or Alt if I'm on a PC, and I click that button, Add Layer Mask, it gives me a black layer mask. And that black layer mask hides the entire layer. So you don't see any of this layer coming through. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this technique, this layer masking technique, and we're going to paint these flowers back in, but the flowers that are visible on the top layer. To do that, you've got a black layer mask. You're going to hit the paint button here. So brush rather. So you can just tap B on your keyboard. That's a shortcut for the brush. But you're gonna be on the brush tool, and then you have to go down into the color swatch, which is in the lower left corner. This is being recorded, by the way. In the lower left corner, you've got your color swatch. Right now, the black is the foreground and the white is the background. We need to switch these. So I'm going to click on that little corner thing. So it's little arrows there. And that just swapped my black with my white. Now I'm on my brush tool and I can paint my flowers in. And my adjustment apparently is not that dramatic. But I think if I were to spend a little bit of time painting my flowers in, what I'm going to yield from this is an image that couldn't exist otherwise, because I've made two different black and white sort of visits to Silver Efex, and we're going to be able to utilize this brighter set of flowers to whatever extent we want using our layer masking to paint the effect in. And as I'm doing this, I'm not seeing that it's not highly transformative in this case. But this kind of technique of mixing layers together like this can yield you things that otherwise you can't do. It's a really nice technique. It's a slightly advanced technique because you've got to use layers and layer masks. And I'll show you what this is doing as I'm now kind of broadly painting in our leaves here, or sorry, our flowers. And I want to leave enough time for Q&A, so I'm not going to be terribly precise, but we'll paint these effects in. So now our flowers are really bright and our leaves are a bit darker. And now we've got nice contrast between those two things. And in this case, with this image, there isn't a lot of depth to it. It's not a terribly three-dimensional image with a foreground, middle ground, background. So being able to control the tones this way becomes kind of important to create some depth in the image as I'm doing terrible masking at painting this in. Anyways, I'm gonna hit Command 0 on my keyboard. Let's just pull out the layers, minimize this. I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller so you can kind of see the difference now between those two layers. So I'll turn off the top layer. There's the before. Here's the after, and it just allows us to control the image in a very different way. Okay, Lori, let's go ahead and transition into the Q&A. I've spent more time doing this than I meant to, but hopefully that's a helpful technique.
Okay, great. If there's any repeats, it's only because I couldn't watch the entire thing as I was typing. So one thing Kathleen was asking, I think she was asking in part 1 too, will you be talking about the Nick Solarization technique? I think you'd mentioned that once before.
Yes, we didn't talk about that. Let's do that really quickly right now. So the Sabatier effect or solarization is a darkroom technique that you would do with photographic materials, whether it's paper or it's, I'm just going to go into Silver Efex, by the way, whether it's paper or it's film, you could actually solarize or the Sabatier effect on either one. It's basically what's called a tonal inversion. I don't know if it'll look great on this image, but the way to create it is to go into your curves layer here. So not curves layer, the film type section and the curves tool. So go into levels and curves. And the Sabatier effect would happen in the darkroom when you partially process your image and then turn a light on, or in a controlled fashion introduce light into the process in a situation where normally you wouldn't. And what it would do is basically invert tones. So let's say I will explain this exactly, but I need to kind of get my curves right at first. It's not working. So what we need to do, let's say we raise this. Raise this. I'm doing it out of order. There we go. So my shadows now become really kind of funky and they are inverted, right? So this is the technique, and it doesn't render exactly how I think it should, the way that I want to really kind of show you, because it's not the right image. But basically what I've done is I've taken my shadows and I've made them really bright, right? So the shadow in my curve would be all the way over here on the left. And I've raised it up so that is above my quarter tones, my darker values. And so you can really see this funky tonal inversion. Basically, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name, Lori. What you're after here is you need to invert tones. And here we're getting into sort of like a more extreme version of that. And that is the highlight, the very brightest value is actually inverted. It's darker than the some of the other values that are further into the histogram. But this is the Sabatier effect. Yeah, I actually meant to put that in here. I totally forgot. I blanked on that. Sorry about that. Should probably make a video.
Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
Okay, Bill was asking if you could just quickly discuss the tonality protection sliders for the highlights and shadows.
Yes. All right. Let's get this back to its original state. So clicking on the neutral preset. Okay, so the question is in regards to the shadow and highlight tonality protection. And actually this is a good place to use the zone mapping system as well. If I go to zone 0 here and I turn that on, I'm gonna turn zone 10 on. I'm just gonna add a little bit more contrast so you can see more of those values are now in zone 0. So more of them are blacked out. There's a number of ways of fixing this. A, don't add so much contrast, right? B, use control points to target certain areas that you don't want to be totally black. So we could take a control point, place it in here, and I can just brighten those values until they're not black anymore, right? So just keep dodging that area. Or what you can do is in a global fashion, you can protect your shadows or your highlights by clicking on that shadow protection slider and start sliding that to the right. What that does is it basically takes all of those very dark values and it starts brightening them up. So if we look at the difference between the shadow adjustment tonality protection slider off compared to it being on completely, it's a way to protect those shadows from going totally black. Or if you've got highlights that are very, very bright, you can take that highlight slider, bring that down, and basically, there's only one spot that's really bright right now. It's some of these flowers. But if we take the highlight slider down, you'll notice almost all of the flowers here have that little blue indicator saying that they're blown out. So you can take the highlight protection slider, slide that to the left, and what it does is globally, it compresses the right side of the histogram. So it basically takes the very brightest values, darkens them all down. I don't find myself using it very often. It's gonna snap too, so sorry, this is actually calculating. There you go, you can see what it's done now. So we've retained some of the highlights. I don't use the highlight and shadow protection sliders often because I do so much to sort of control my contrast globally that I don't want my global contrast to kind of be adjusted with these sliders. I just don't find them too useful. What I do is rather than using the highlight protection slider, since I only need to protect a few of these little areas, I would just take a control point and place that point in there and go back in there and save that information. So I take my brightness level down, and it'll take a second because we're zoomed in now, but you can see as the that zone sort of disappears. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's see here. How about there are a few people that were asking how you make those zone mapping numbers come up. So if you could just kind of roll over your.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the way that you turn on your zone mapping is you just scroll over them, and then if you want to lock them in place, you click on it. So you can see as I'm scrolled over zone 3 right now, this is giving us that indicator. Those orange lines that just showed up, that's zone 3. If I want to turn off zone 0, so I've clicked on zone 3 to lock it on. If I want to turn off zone 0, I just go click on it, it turns it back off. And you know, the ones that are really the most important to remember is that zone 0 is black, no detail. Zone 10 is white with no detail. And then your zones in between are sort of those related values from dark to light. And you can use them to kind of create and control the right tonal value for your image. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, there are a lot of questions, but our time is up. Looks like we're at the top of the hour. And Dan, thank you very much for this presentation. And just want to remind everybody, we've got part 1 that's up on our webinar website. Maybe Dan, if you could show them, or did you show them already where that is?
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Oop, now I just opened Firefox by accident. Okay, so here we're at the nickcollection.dxo.com/webinars. So if you just went to the Nick Collection website and then you click on the Explore box in the upper right corner, you can click on Webinars. And then you can also check out even more great information in the Explore section. If you don't have the software, you want to get the free trial, you can click on the free trial and so on. And then I think you can download presets from here. Oh no, this is to upgrade, sorry. Yep. So in the webinar section, the 3 that are here are the upcoming webinars. So you are in the advanced one right here. And then there are 2 others. And then if you scroll down, you can find a boatload. I don't even know how many, but it just keeps scrolling. If you want to find a specific piece of software, you can actually click on, like if you want to learn more about Silver Efex, just click on the Silver Efex Pro, and all of these webinars are either focused on or include Silver Efex Pro as a a facet of the webinar.
Fantastic. Great, Dan. Thanks for showing that.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you will join us for another webinar. We tried to have quite a few each month. Dan, I'll go ahead and let you close up. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lori. That was fun. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out. Hopefully you had a good time. I know I sure did. And I hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.